Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
From the blazing sand of the Sinai to the lush valleys of the Nile, from the deserts of Canaan to the golden riches of Nubia, a tapestry of ancient connections stretches across time and space, one veiled in mystery, devotion, migration, and transformation. The history of the ancient Hebrews is deeply intertwined with that of Africa, in ways that mainstream historical narratives have often overlooked or dismissed. Yet, as one peers beneath the veil of time, guided by archaeology, oral traditions, and ancient texts, a rich and enduring relationship emerges, a story that challenges the boundaries of identity, geography, and belief. This is a story that begins not in isolation but in motion, shaped by flight, refuge, divine covenant, and cultural exchange. Africa, often seen as a passive stage in the biblical story, is in truth an active character. Egypt, Cush, and Ethiopia are not mere footnotes in Hebrew scripture but play central roles in the story of a people chosen, exiled, enslaved, redeemed, and scattered. As we follow the ancient Hebrews through the deserts and deltas, temples and tombs, we find footprints across African soil that bear testimony to a bond far older and deeper than often acknowledged. Long before the rise of European scholarship and its tendency to divide the ancient world into Western and non-Western binaries, the people of the Near East and Northeast Africa were in constant interaction, sharing not only trade routes but languages, beliefs, and bloodlines. The border between what is today called the Middle East and North Africa was far more porous than modern maps suggest. In fact, to speak of ancient Hebrews without Africa is to tell a story half-told, stripped of context and stripped of meaning. The Hebrew Bible, known to the world as the Old Testament, offers profound insights into this relationship. Africa, particularly Egypt and Ethiopia, is frequently mentioned in both historical and prophetic contexts. The story of the Hebrews begins in Mesopotamia, but quickly moves toward Egypt, a land of both refuge and bondage. Abraham, the patriarch of the Hebrew people, sojourned in Egypt during a time of famine. His grandson Jacob and his entire household eventually settled there under the protection of Joseph, who had risen to prominence within the Egyptian court. These narratives, far from being minor anecdotes, form the very foundation of Hebrew identity, a people shaped by exile, displacement, and divine deliverance from Africa's most powerful ancient empire. The Exodus story is perhaps the most iconic episode linking the Hebrews to Africa. It tells of a nation enslaved in Egypt, rising under the leadership of Moses to seek freedom and divine covenant. For centuries, scholars have debated the historicity of this event, and while the exact timeline remains a subject of scholarly inquiry, what is not in question is the symbolic and theological power of this African episode. Egypt, once a sanctuary, became a crucible of oppression, and yet it was also the birthplace of Hebrew nationhood. The rituals, laws, and social structures that Moses would later codify bore clear influences from Egyptian religion and governance, suggesting a complex and sometimes contradictory relationship between oppressor and inspired imitator. Moreover, Egypt's role did not end with the Exodus. Even after the Hebrews entered Canaan, Africa continued to shape their destiny. During the divided monarchy of Israel and Judah, both kingdoms maintained political and military alliances with African states. King Solomon's marriage to an Egyptian princess symbolized a strategic bond with the Nile Valley. Centuries later, when Jerusalem fell under threat, Judean kings often sought refuge and support from Egypt. This repeated turning to Africa, not only for aid but for asylum, reflects a deep-seated geopolitical connection. Equally fascinating is the recurring role of Ethiopia, or Cush, as it was known in ancient texts. The prophet Isaiah speaks of ambassadors from Cush crossing the sea in papyrus boats, and the Psalms exclaim that Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. Psalm 68 verse 31. These aren't mere poetic flourishes. They reflect a Hebrew worldview in which the African interior was seen not only as geographically significant but spiritually resonant. The figure of the Ethiopian eunuch in the New Testament Acts of the Apostles, who converts to the new faith after reading the prophet Isaiah, continues this tradition of African receptiveness to Hebrew and later Judaic spiritual messages. But perhaps the most intriguing and least understood aspect of this relationship is the possibility of Hebrew presence within Africa itself, not just as travelers or diplomats, but as settlers, exiles, and even nations. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC scattered the Jewish population far beyond Jerusalem and Babylon. Some found their way to Egypt, establishing communities in Elephantine and Upper Egypt, where Jewish mercenaries built a temple and lived in peace with Egyptian neighbors. Papyri from the 5th century BCE unearthed from Elephantine provide direct evidence of Hebrew communities living within African borders, practicing a form of Judaism that had adapted to its local environment yet retained its core identity. Later waves of migration brought Jews deeper into the continent. In Ethiopia, the Beta Israel community, often referred to as Ethiopian Jews, claim descent from ancient Israelites. Their oral traditions trace their lineage to the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, a story preserved in the Keber Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic. While this narrative has been subject to much scrutiny, the presence of Jewish customs, dietary laws, and scriptural traditions among the Beta Israel long before their rediscovery by European travelers strongly suggests ancient and autonomous development. Genetic studies have further complicated the picture, showing both Semitic and local African ancestry, thus pointing toward a synthesis of Hebrew heritage and African identity. In West Africa, too, echoes of Hebrew presence can be found. Medieval Arab and Jewish travelers recorded tales of Jewish communities along the Niger River and in regions corresponding to modern-day Mali, Ghana, and Nigeria. Names, rituals, and linguistic traces in some African tribes bear resemblance to Hebrew customs. Among the Igbo of southeastern Nigeria, for instance, there exists a long-standing tradition of descent from the lost tribes of Israel. Though controversial and contested, these claims persist not only in cultural practice but in the deeply felt identity of those who uphold them. What emerges from all this is a story not of cultural borrowing or temporary contact, but of entanglement, a narrative in which Africa and the ancient Hebrews were partners in faith, survival, and transformation. Africa was not simply a land visited in times of need, but a place where Hebrew identity was tested, reshaped, and in some cases replanted. The boundaries between Jew and African, Semite and Hamite, were not rigid lines but flowing rivers, carrying with them trade, stories, prayers, and blood. Modern scholarship has only just begun to appreciate the full depth of this relationship. For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, colonial and Eurocentric paradigms separated African history from biblical and Semitic traditions. Today, interdisciplinary research, from archaeology and genetics to comparative religion and linguistics, is reweaving the fabric of the past. The deeper we dig into the sands of Egypt, the hills of Ethiopia, and the manuscripts of medieval Africa, the clearer the picture becomes. The story of the ancient Hebrews cannot be told without Africa. And perhaps Africa's story, too, cannot be fully understood without them. This is not merely a tale of the past. It is a living connection. The descendants of these ancient crossings continue to inhabit both spiritual and physical landscapes, from the synagogues of Addis Ababa to the Torah scrolls of Nigerian elders. They carry with them the legacy of a time when the Hebrew God walked among pyramids and papyrus, when prophets looked to the south for wisdom and warning, and when Africa offered both a cradle and a crucible for a people in search of destiny. To explore this mysterious connection is to embark on a journey that defies modern categories and calls into question everything we think we know about history, race, and religion. It is a reminder that identity is not a fixed point but a river, flowing through deserts and deltas, linking peoples, places, and promises in the endless tide of human memory.